Thank you, Karis, for the introduction, and thank you to Sylvia Clausen. Sylvia and I grew up in church together, and we recently reconnected on my social media accounts that are linked to my the promotion that I've done for the book that I wrote. So that is one of the reasons, actually, for the theme today of "There's Always Hope," and I'm excited to talk to you about my life living with hope, and I hope to point you to God, who, as Romans 15:13 says, is the source of hope. This is my hopeful outline. I want to share my faith story with you and then talk about my book, Invisibly Ill and Living with Hope, just as it relates to my faith story and also as it relates to me living with hope as I faced some difficult times and found hope amidst all of it, and then end with hopeful encouragement. Okay, this is the house that I grew up on. Grew up in the front there, in the street that I grew up on. It was full of children and activities and playing outside and making our mums turn the rope so we could double dutch. And it was just a wonderful childhood. Anyway, I also went to an elementary school very close by, and every morning we'd have a mini assembly where we would sing "O Canada," say the Lord's Prayer, have a Bible story, and also sing "God Save the Queen." Needless to say, you're not going to find that in a public school in Winnipeg today. I grew up in a Christian home. I used to think that was a boring way to start my testimony because I didn't have a dramatic conversion. But I think now that's incredible that I can say that I have always known the love of God and the love of each of these people. So this is Dirksen 5, the OG members of my family. I'm the middle sister, and I love that. I always had two best friends, and I had two loving, godly parents who tucked us in every night. We said prayers together, and we could easily talk about our faith, and we learned from them. They took us to all the good church things and supported us as we grew in our faith. So that group of 5 turned into 14 as we were pictured here at our silliest. This is in 2017. But just this last December, we added number 15 as our niece got married. The amazing thing about this is that all 15 of us are living for Jesus, and it's easy to talk to any 2 or 3 people in the group could talk to each other about faith, and it would be natural and wonderful. It's common to hear the younger generation talking about sharing their faith, and it's just such a joy and a delight, and not one of us takes this for granted. So I'll take you back to our church basement in 1977. In the back there is Sylvia with her mom, who was our faithful Sunday school teacher. Now, when I see those white benches that the kids are sitting at, it makes me think of one thing in particular, and that is a time when I was probably about 5 at a daily vacation Bible school. We called it DVBS. And I was singing at the top of my heart, from the bottom of my heart, I was singing, "Love is the flag flown high from my castle. Love is a flag flown high from the castle of my heart, where the king is in residence there." Except that I was singing where the king is the president there, because the word residence really didn't register. After that song, I remember them asking, the leaders asked if anybody wanted to ask Jesus into their heart. We could follow along with a simple prayer that they shared. And I'm like, well, that's a no-brainer. Like, let's make it official. God's always been part of my life. If this is what we do, let's do it. So very eagerly did that. And I guess ever since then, God has taken up residence in my heart, and hopefully has also been the president of my heart. So I went to Bible camp, Red Rock Bible Camp to be specific, as a child, and then as a teen I was a counselor for a couple of years, and it had a huge impact on my faith. It was a huge encouragement to me, and one of the biggest things I remember that blessed me was the singing. It spilled over into our family sedan. We'd often be traveling back from our cottage in the White Shell, and it was dark, and I'd look out at the stars and be in wonder of the majesty of God. And those are times that I remember feeling very close to both God and my family, and I would call that a core memory. This is one of the songs that we sang both in our car and at camp, and I've just splashed up some of the words here that meant so much to me then and still do now, and have a much deeper meaning now when I look back to see how God has led me through things I had never anticipated happening. Now, I have made a little website for all of you, so you don't have to take copious notes about this. I've sort of taken notes for you, and one of the things that I've done is put the notes or put all the lyrics for the 2 songs that I'm going to be sharing. The full lyrics for the songs will be on that website, as well as all the verses that I'm sharing, and then just some other little reminders of things that I talk about. So there's a card on your table that has that website. QR code goes there, but the website's also given. So you can look forward to that if that's something you want to review later. Now, I'll go to my junior high days. I left that great elementary school and went into a school 3 times the size. And it was intimidating. I felt like a small fish in a big pond. And I had a huge striving to want to belong. And I think that's pretty common at that age, regardless of how many friends you go into your junior high with. Eventually, that striving to belong led to me striving to belong to a romantic relationship. And I had a series of short-term relationships, and I really, it's evident now when I look back, I wasn't looking for God's leading and discerning. I was idolizing being in a romantic relationship. Sadly, eventually, this led to an idolization of wanting to be in a marriage relationship, and I was trying to make things work when I really should have noticed the warning signs and missed a red flag. So I was not really giving up on that relationship. I just didn't want one more breakup. But my parents were wise to that, and they did a lot of research and emotionally, and they brought to light a lot of the lies I'd been told. And at one point, probably out of desperation, my dad said, "I forbid you to see him anymore." And I felt caught because I was in my early 20s. What do I do? And do I have to obey? How does this work? I didn't know if Dad could still really forbid me from things. Anyway, a long story short, I stopped seeing the man. I'm glad I listened to my dad, and there's no turning back. Things get happier now. This is me getting my Bachelor of Education degree in 1997 from U of M. I got a teaching job for the fall. I got my first car. She was a fun little car. I named her Sparky, and I bought her totally for the manual transmission and not for the color. And then I moved out. I was 23 and left the nest, and I'll save you the math. I'm 52 now. I had beautiful quiet times at Rowendale Apartments. I would remember spending an hour just in the Word and being amazed at all of the promises offered to us. It was like, if we are faithful to God, if we obey God, then we would get all these blessings. And I remember thinking, that just seems unnecessary. Like, we should obey God outright. We shouldn't have to be rewarded for that. He's done enough for us, surely, that we would just want to obey him. But this is our God, and he does shower us with lavish blessings. So in 2019, I started memorizing scripture in earnest, and I'm not mentioning this to brag at all, but my little middle-aged self was able to get up to about 150 verses that I maintain today. And if you go to that website later, you can, I will let you in on my secret, because it was a lot easier than I thought it would be. But one of the verses I've added more recently talks about God's lavish grace and getting what we don't deserve. And that is this, that if we are faithful to the end, we will share in all that belongs to Christ. Like, wow, we will share in the biggest inheritance ever. It's mind-boggling that God would love us that much. So I lived in that apartment from July to December 97, and then the next month in January I met my Kevin, and we had our first date March 21st of that year, and we're married exactly a year later. I'm going to transition to talking about the book now, because it's intersecting with my faith story here and our message of hope. So when we said our vows through all life's trials and blessings, we knew that encompassed sickness and health, among other things, and we had no idea how meaningful those vows would become, and we had no idea the trials that awaited for us, and we never would have guessed that with those trials there would be so very many blessings. And fun fact, the reason why Kevin's the only one not smiling or laughing here is because he was supposed to be saying his vow and supposed to be saying that he takes me before God, but I think what he said was, "I, Kevin, take you, God," and I love him. He takes things seriously, and he's concentrating, and yeah, I love him so much. But anyway, I am not God, and he did get the words right in the end, and we have been happily married since. So this is a shirt that says these are difficult times. It's got two key signatures. As a musician, I would say 13.8. Yeah, that could be difficult. 6.4 is not so bad, but I think it's probably a COVID shirt. Anyway, I thought it was a good transition to talking about some difficult times I've had with my health, which I talk about in the first 8 chapters in a section I called Health Hiccups. So my health hiccups are chronic migraine, relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis, clinical depression, and IBS. As I was preparing for another talk, I noticed how closely linked each of my conditions was to the one that followed, and we'll see that as we go along here. So chapter 1 I've named brain pain because I can't pass up a fun little rhyme, but I started getting headaches when I was about the age I'm in that picture there. Eventually it was in my 20s they were diagnosed as migraine and then chronic migraine. But like in high school, I remember having like a 6-week long headache, and I felt like I became known as Little Miss Always Has a Migraine. Eventually, I got sent to a neurologist for a deeper dive, and he ordered an MRI, but nothing showed up to give any clues to why I was getting headaches, which was kind of frustrating because I was kind of hoping for something to show up that would lead to a solution. But then again, I think maybe it was a relief that there wasn't anything super sinister that showed up. Now you might catch on that MRIs may have a link to MS, and we'll find out about that next. Here's a little joke, and you should know that I joke a lot when it comes to my health, because if you got to be able to laugh at yourself, and you got to be able to laugh at what's happening with you, because sometimes that's all we got. Anyway, I'm not going to say it like that for real in real life. Here's the joke. How do I tell my immune system that my nervous system isn't being hunted for sport? In a little lesson in autoimmune diseases, which MS is, in an autoimmune disease, the immune system attacks healthy cells. So in my case, it's my nervous system that's being attacked. If you have psoriasis, then it's your skin that's being attacked. And there are so many autoimmune diseases, and they all attack something different. I wouldn't doubt that there are many, many represented in the room today. The chapter where I talk about my life living with MS is called Not My Favorite Roller Coasters. And I start off the chapter talking about these two specifically. They were the first two that I really loved. Now, the joke about the chapter name is that MS was not my favorite roller coaster. And these are, I've sort of illustrated why, because there's spikes in disease activity, and then there are remissions. So relapses and remissions, and lots of highs and lows emotionally as well. So your remission is kind of going back to your baseline, but it's not your pre-MS baseline. It's your new normal, so to speak. Very soon after, I jumped ahead. My first relapse was a numb leg. My leg fell asleep and it didn't wake up, and that happened about 3 days before I found out I was pregnant. When the pregnancy test came back positive and I talked to my doctor, I also told her about the leg, and she sent me back to the same neurologist who had ordered the MRI. And then when I saw him, he said, you know what, your MRI actually wasn't totally normal. It had 2 white spots or lesions. Now, these wouldn't have been a concern when I had only headache symptoms presenting, but because they were consistent with MS and the symptoms I presented with now, the numb leg also were, they became a remarkable finding. However, he couldn't diagnose me. He would have wanted more MRIs, and I was pregnant, so all that had to be put on hold. So about 2.5 months after our sweet Claire Bear was born, I had a motor relapse. Went back to the neurologist, and he said, okay, so with the 3 sensory relapses you had during pregnancy and that MRI, I am comfortable saying that you do have relapsing, remitting multiple sclerosis. So that was a very emotional appointment. The last words I ever heard from the man who diagnosed me were, "Have a good life," as I walked out of his office with a fistful of pamphlets. Those words hit me hard and made me wonder if I wasn't supposed to have a good life, or if good lives aren't offered to people with MS. As it turns out, I've been given many years to write the book on whether those thoughts were valid. Spoiler alert, I have an exceptionally good life, and it is my joy today to share with you about that good life and the hope that I have. So that is just an excerpt from chapter 2, where I talk about my emotional and dramatic road to diagnosis. So very soon after that, I was sent to the MS clinic and assigned to an MS neurologist, and I was told that I was recommended, and I agreed that I should start on a disease-modifying therapy, which I might call DMT in the future. So I was a little freaked out though, because that meant injections. I had a solution though. This is my big sister who's always protected me, and she grew up to become the world's best nurse, and the only reason she's not here this morning is because she is in BC getting her Master's of Nursing degree. I'm very proud of her, but she came with me to my appointment where I was trained on how to give the injections with the auto injector, and it felt so good to have someone who cared so very much and also who was a medical person in my corner. The very minute that I pressed the button and the drug went into my body, I burst into tears because that was the very moment MS became real to me. She was there for that, and she swooped in with her love and concern. But I'm happy to say that was the last emotional injection. It became routine in our family, and Claire would often help me out and help me get my supplies out, and we even let her press the button on the auto injector when she was like 3 years old, maybe, I don't know. And then she'd walk around and proudly tell people, I gave Mama a needle. And we just wanted to normalize some of these things that can be so scary for kids. So this is my roller coaster of DMTs, or disease-modifying therapies. I was on 3 different injections. I had a clinical trial that was with IV infusions. Nothing ever came of that. I'm now on a pill that I've been on since 2015. Happy to say my last relapse was 2014, but I have had a progression in my everyday symptoms since then. So you can read more about that in chapter 3 in my book, the difference between symptoms and relapses. But at the very beginning of all that, we wanted to have another baby, and so I had to go off my MS meds for that. And Rob went off her meds, got a lot of relapses, so we made the hard decision that our family was complete. And with our one child, our one incredible child, and there's no looking back now. We're absolutely delighted with our family, and we wouldn't change a thing. I did find a temporary cure for MS, and this is my new favorite roller coaster. I was on a holiday and I'd had a relapse, and I was very tired walking around amusement parks, but when I got on here, there was only time for fun. I totally forgot about MS. I was having just as much fun as anyone else, probably more actually. Okay, I love this meme. It's maybe hard to see, but I've included this in the website so you can have a better look. Basically, my chronic illness is telling my body that he's invited another friend and hopes that's okay, but the friend has anxiety and depression, much to the shock of the body. So many truths to this, because illnesses tend to collect. I get all the stuff for our whole family. There's very little that Kevin and Claire deal with. And depression, I think, is one of the most common things that starts, that's what's called a comorbidity with other illnesses. A comorbidity is when 2 or more conditions exist in the same person. It's All Right to Cry is my chapter about depression, and excuse me. I'm not afraid to talk to people about depression and anxiety. I think it's super healthy, and it's been really validating to why I wrote the book, because I've had conversations with people afterwards who say that they feel seen and they feel understood. And I think that depression, mental health in general, mental illness in general, is not talked about as easily as physical illness, and I think it needs to be. So I am happy to open the door to those conversations. So my first round of depression, my biggest symptom was irritability, but what led up to that was being overwhelmed by having a new disease and being a new parent. It was just weird because so many lovely people I found just so irritating. And after I was on a medication, a lot of things stabilized, and I actually realized that people are very delightful. So I apologize to anyone who may have had the grumpy side of me. Round 2, though, was a little bit different. So round 2 happened 10 years after I started on meds, because I went off. I wanted to find out what it was like to be just Robin, because antidepressants do have side effects. And just Robin turns out is a crier, and she cries and cries and cries and cries. And like the normal thing is like a long distance commercial, sure, or at least seriously, like a friend passing, absolutely. But I would cry about really ridiculous things just because I was proud of my kid, and it. My therapist said, "Does it feel like you're laughing at a funeral?" I'm like, "Yes, it's totally incongruent." So you can read about one of the most ridiculous of these these silly crying spells in chapter chapter 7. Yeah, in chapter 7. Anyway, but then round 3 was more of an anxiety round. So that happened a few years ago where I started to become anxious, and I was so anxious that I became anxious about being anxious. So it turns out, and my therapist brought this to light, that my anxiety, the root cause of it was likely all the stuff that I manage and just trying to manage all the medical things that I'm dealing with. And I think that was just really validating and probably lessened my anxiety to a degree. Now we're going to talk about what I'm calling capital A anxiety and lowercase a anxiety. This is not from any textbook that I've read, it's just from my little brain based on something a therapist told me about capital T trauma versus lowercase t trauma. So capital T trauma, it's like huge stuff like, trafficking or concentration camps, like whatever. And lowercase t trauma, stuff that everyone has probably dealt with here and there. We've all dealt with, it's a broken world. We've all dealt with some hurtful things. And there's a spectrum, obviously, to all this. But I think that as women, we are subject to a lot of lowercase a trauma and or lowercase a anxiety. And I think my anxiety was probably somewhere between capital A and lowercase a, closer to lowercase a. Is this you? Don't worry either way. Trust me, I am worrying both ways, plus all kinds of ways you haven't thought of. This is me at night. My brain is going and going and going. I think this is a woman's problem because my husband is fast asleep 30 seconds after we've said our goodnights, sometimes sooner. But my brain still has to, work everything out and try to control the world. We have some scriptures. I'm not going to say a whole lot about the next one. I think it speaks for itself. But if we get into this kind of rut, let's learn to take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. Let's take our thoughts to Christ and commit them to Him because He's the one who's actually in control. And then I really like Philippians 4:6-7. This is from the NLT. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank Him for all He has done. I just love so much that we're invited to tell God what we need, to pray about everything. And let's never miss the thankfulness component because I think that reframes things in our minds so that our focus is on what God has done and not just on our circumstances. And then another one of these rewards that these blessings that we don't deserve, and it's peace that exceeds anything that we can understand. And what a gift that is to us. Okay, now I'm going to say proceed with caution. So those verses are great, and they're great for everyone. They're biblical, but we have to be careful we don't just throw them out as a pat answer to someone who is going through this kind of thing, because if they were given to me as an encouragement when I was in my darkest days, I would have felt like, oh, great, okay, so I don't pray good enough, or another way, I'm not measuring up, and it would just add it to my negative self-talk. So let's proceed with caution. Start off by being a really good listener and ask for wisdom and how you can encourage someone who is going through some kind of mental illness struggle. Because we want to be encouraging, but we also want to respect that these are complicated and layered issues. I think it's well known that the gut and the mind have a link. I think we've all had nervous tummies, for instance. I probably have one right now. But anyway, for me, it went beyond that, and I actually have intolerances to food. So I have IBS, and for fear of you renaming it by another 3 letters, namely TMI, I will be delicate in how I handle this. But the main things are it has meant fewer food choices and a lot more time in the bathroom. I'm in the bathroom also for a long time because of my bladder, and that's an MS thing. I won't go into all that right now. But I've joked with Claire and said, you're going to end up in therapy and telling your counselor, my mom was never around. She was always in the bathroom. And she goes, "Oh, Mom, I will not end up in therapy for that." Now, she didn't finish the sentence, but I could read between the lines. If she ends up in therapy, Kevin and I are good parents, and we have given her plenty of other reasons. Let's live half full. Let's talk about persistently persevering. So I'm gonna go through a half empty, half full thing for each of my conditions, and we'll start with migraines. So pain has been the very half empty. Pain has been horrible. In this picture, I'm at a 10 on the pain scale. I was at a wedding and we had to leave early, and that's the other thing that's been hard is the missing out on things. I missed out on 2 showers this month because I had to stay at home in a quiet place in a dark room. I had to make sure I was away from fragrances. So yes, the FOMO is real. But look at these guys. These are my most adorable and faithful prayers. They're always praying for me. I can't count the number of times Kevin's prayers have simply been, "Oh God, please bless Robin's head." So they know they know the day to day, and I make a habit of not hiding from them when I'm in pain. I might hide it by how I'm acting, but I don't hide it with my words. I let them know where I'm at, and they appreciate that. It helps them to be sensitive with sound and light and that kind of thing. But I also have some top tier prayers that I reach out to on a PRN basis. In medical lingo, PRN means take as needed. So you might have that as an instruction on medication. But I call it pray for Robin Nicole or pray right now. And I reach out to my Dirksen 5 and to a best friend so that they can pray for me, and they have prayed me through a number of difficult migraine weeks. For MS, the biggest symptom, the earliest one that presented that was life-changing, was the fatigue. I liken it to feeling like you've got sandbags weighing you down. I admit I got Gemini, the AI assistant, to make this image for me. Sorry about that. But yeah, that's what it just feels so hard to get out of bed. Sometimes we say, "Wow, there's just so much gravity today," but I have a very weird motivator. What inspires me to get out of the bed every day? It's mostly my bladder, which is true, but it's not just every day. It's every night, many times throughout the night, and that's called nocturia, and it's a really fun feature of my neurogenic bladder. I'm up at night many times and not for short times. So obviously that will impact my energy the next day. I would 0 out of 10 recommend this. Look at these lovely people. I really hope some of you do read my book, just for the fact that I want you to read about the masterclass in caregiving that Kevin and Claire give. They have been unbelievable to me. I've also really liked the support from mobility or assistive devices. I was very hesitant to use any because I didn't want people looking at me funny because, I'm not old, and I'm using a rollator or a walker, like, oh my goodness, or what if they saw me in a mobility scooter or whatever. And I think that nobody looks at someone who is smiling and living life to the fullest while using an assistive device or not. So I'm embracing them now and the help they give me. So as I've said before, the emotional part of depression has been hard, but so has the isolation. As my negative self-talk increased, I isolated myself more and more, and I felt very alone, and that people probably didn't get it, what I was going through. And like I said before, we need to be open and to talk about these things and be vulnerable and find out that we're not alone. So I was trying so hard to be normal, and it took a lot of mental energy. But can we just erase that word normal? Because it's not helpful. We should not be comparing ourselves to others or to a standard we think we need to achieve. So it's, let's throw that one out the window. Now, sorry, this girl doesn't look so happy, but this is the therapy. This is the therapy AI generated graphic I could come up with. But therapy has been helpful. Medication has been helpful, as I've said. And my husband praying for me has been incredible. He asked for this book for Christmas, which my parents were eager to buy for him, and he intentionally prayed for me. I was medicated at the time by going through a pretty tough funk, and I came out of it through his prayers, through the power of the Lord, and I'm so thankful. The worst parts about IBS is like I can't eat stuff like gluten, lactose, onions, garlic, and a whole bunch of other things, and it's the reason that I have to or I choose to, just so I feel safe, choose to bring my own food to various events. Um, but this guy, he makes wonderful food for me that is still tasty. He's very creative, and he's my faithful personal chef, and he'll often try to make a meal that sort of fits in with what other people are eating. If I'm bringing food somewhere, he goes out of his way. He's amazing. Let's have some hopeful encouragement now, and I hope to point you to some scripture to help you, or just to give you encouragement as you live whatever your story is. I love these verses. These will be on that website. They just speak to solidarity, which is one of my favorite things. I have in my notes, solidarity for the win. Do it. And that's prompting me to tell you solidarity is the best, and we need to show solidarity to others. And how about I explain that without keep saying that word? Let's show others that we know what they're going through, because we really do. So if you've experienced something and you can comfort someone else, do it. I've experienced so much comfort from God and others, and it's an honor to know that I have comforted others. So nothing bad comes out of that. Now, I listened to a sermon by Cam Stevens a while ago, and it was very helpful because he talked about this little word "if." It's a very powerful word. I think we have often said things to ourselves like, well, if only blah, 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 then I could be happy. But what if we turn that around and remind ourselves that even if blah, 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 everything will be fine because God's in control. God is sovereign. He's in charge, and he's got us. So I challenge you to take whatever if only statement you would have and turn it into an even if statement. I can honestly say that my blessings have been way bigger than my hardships. I've shared Job 1:21 with people, and it talks about how Job was saying, the Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. And I think people who know my story and hear that that's one of my favorite verses, they'll be like, oh yeah, Robin feels so much the Lord has taken away. But if we read this whole thing in context, the context isn't really that God took it away, but that God allowed Satan to take things away from Job. Now, I'm not putting myself on par with Job's blamelessness, but I do relate a bit to this. And I would say that the Lord gave is what I want to shout out, because that's how I feel that the Lord has given me so much. It's been what the Lord has given has been so much more than any hardships that I may have endured. And I hope that my life points to Jesus and results in the praise of his name. How should we pray for ourselves and for others when they're sick? Like, is that even still okay? So I should be the expert, right? Sylvia St. Cyr interviewed me for CHV, and she asked me this question, and I said, I don't know if you want me praying for you when you're sick. And she goes, oh my, tell me more. And it's because I have learned that our priorities and God's priorities are different, and we'll get into that as I go along. First of all, God does care for us, and he wants to hear from us. It's okay to ask for healing, and God definitely still heals. But it's apparent he doesn't always answer our requests with healing. So what's up with that? I think what's up with that is that God has different priorities, like I was just saying. Let's pray for God's best for us. And let's not assume that we know what that is. Let's include prayers for our spiritual and our physical health. It's very easy to ask for physical health prayers, but how is our spiritual health going? And God's priority is not that we are well physically on this earth, but we are well spiritually. So we need to pray and trust that God knows best. And we need to be assured that if something isn't answered the way we want, something even better is waiting for us. And I believe I am living proof of this, because the life I would have planned for myself is very different from the one I'm living and loving. And our broken world can still have hope. I love it that Jesus says this. In this world you will have trouble. Duh, we know that. He says it like it is. But take heart, I've overcome the world. And we need to remember what happens in the end. Jesus is victorious. He's conquered death, as we were reminded on Easter. My birthday was in Easter, this past Easter, and it was like one of my best Easters ever. And I kept telling everyone, Jesus is out of the tomb and I'm out of the womb. And it was just such a celebration. So anyway, Jesus is victorious, and I really encourage you all to think eternally. Put your circumstances in perspective in that way. And who is looking forward to this day with me with no more crying or pain or death or mourning? I know I am looking forward to Jesus making everything new, including my balance, so that I can go skateboarding with my Claire Bear in the heavenly skate park. I think we're pretty familiar with these verses where Paul's talking about God's strength and his weakness. And I'm relating to this because so many times people say to me, Robin, you're so strong. I don't know how you do it. You're such an inspiration. And I feel like saying, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't feel very inspiring because it's often said to me at times when I really do feel weak. So if they're seeing strength, they're seeing Christ's strength. And that's just, it's incredible to me that Jesus would work through me in that way. But it is my prayer that that it's his strength that's highlighted, not mine. I think this song really reflects that verse, and this is my prayer for my life. To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus, all the glory evermore to him. When the race is complete, still my lips shall repeat, yet not I, but through Christ in me. So there is always hope, and I hope that I've shown you a hopeful life. I will be available at the end to sell some paperbacks for $20, and like Kara said, there will be a donation given to Hope Center Ministries for each book sold. And if you wanted to do an e-transfer, you can use the email address on the cards at your table. And I will end the way I ended with the very last words, the conclusion of my book. May the name of the Lord be praised.